The old truck bumped along the dirt road as 18-year-old Mercy Harrow pressed her hand against her growing belly. 6 months pregnant and scared, she looked out at the dark trees that seemed to reach toward their vehicle like twisted fingers. Her husband, Thomas, gripped the steering wheel tight, his jaw set in that stubborn way she was learning to recognize. "Almost there now," Thomas said, trying to sound cheerful. But Mercy could hear the worry in his voice too. The year was 1952 and life had moved fast for Mercy, for just 8 months ago she had been living with her parents in the small town of Millbrook, Vermont. She spent her days helping her mother with household chores and dreaming about her future. Then she met Thomas Harrow at a church social, and everything changed. Thomas was 22, 4 years older than Mercy, with kind brown eyes and strong hands from working at the lumber mill. He was gentle and respectful, nothing like the rowdy boys her age. When he asked her father for permission to court her, Mercy felt her heart flutter like a trapped bird. The courtship was brief. In those days, young people did not date for years like they do now. Within 3 months, Thomas had proposed, and within 5 months they were married in the small white church where Mercy had been baptized as a baby. The wedding was simple but beautiful, with white roses from her mother's garden and a cake made by the church ladies. But life had another surprise waiting. Just 2 weeks after their wedding, Mercy discovered she was expecting a baby. The news brought joy mixed with terror. At 18, she felt too young to be a wife, let alone a mother. But Thomas was over the moon, talking about the little one constantly and making plans for their growing family. Then came the letter that changed everything. Thomas's grandmother, Eleanor Harrow, had died suddenly in her sleep. Mercy had never met the old woman, who lived alone in the family farmhouse about 20 miles outside of town. Thomas rarely spoke of his grandmother, and when he did, his expression would grow distant and sad. "She was always a bit strange," he had told Mercy once. "After my grandfather died, she became very isolated. Some folks in town said she talked to people who weren't there." The will reading brought unexpected news. Eleanor had left the entire property to Thomas, her only remaining family. The farmhouse sat on 40 acres of wooded land, far from any neighbors. It was a Victorian-style home built in the 1880s, with gabled windows and wraparound porches that had once been grand but now showed their age. For a young couple struggling to pay rent on their tiny apartment above the hardware store, inheriting a house seemed like a blessing. Thomas's wages at the lumber mill barely covered their basic needs, and with a baby coming, they needed space and financial relief. But Mercy felt uneasy from the moment she heard about the inheritance. Growing up, her grandmother had told her stories about people who could sense things others could not. "Some folks have the gift," her grandmother would say, stirring a pot of soup while Mercy listened with wide eyes. "They can feel when something ain't right, when spirits are restless." Mercy had always wondered if she might have inherited some of that sensitivity. Sometimes she would walk into a room and feel sadness or fear that did not belong to her. She would dream about people she had never met, only to learn later that someone matching her dream had lived in their house years before. Her parents, who were deeply religious, did not approve of such talk. They believed in God and angels, but discussions of ghosts or spirits made them uncomfortable. So Mercy learned to keep her strange feelings to herself. Now, as they approached the old Harrow farmhouse, those feelings were stronger than ever. The house appeared suddenly through a break in the trees, and Mercy's breath caught in her throat. It was larger than she had expected, 3 stories tall with dark shutters and peeling white paint. The wraparound porch sagged in places, and several windows on the upper floors were boarded up. But it was not the house's condition that made Mercy's stomach clench with dread. It was the feeling that washed over her like cold water. Sadness. Deep, overwhelming sadness that seemed to seep from the very walls. "It needs some work," Thomas admitted, parking the truck near the front steps. "But think of all the space we'll have for the baby. And look at this land, Mercy. Our child can run and play without worrying about traffic or crowds." Mercy nodded, trying to share his enthusiasm. The practical side of her knew he was right. They needed this house. They could not afford to be picky about free housing, especially with a baby coming. They climbed the front steps together, the old boards creaking under their weight. Thomas had the key his grandmother's lawyer had given him. and the front door swung open with a loud groan. The inside smelled of dust and old wood with an underlying scent Mercy could not identify. Something floral and sweet, but gone bad, like flowers left too long in water. The rooms were spacious but dark, with heavy curtains blocking most of the natural light. "We can brighten it up," Thomas said, walking through the front parlor. "New paint, some of your mother's quilts on the walls. It will be home in no time." Mercy followed him through the downstairs rooms. The kitchen was large but outdated, with an old cast-iron stove and a deep sink under a window that looked out onto the backyard. The dining room held a long wooden table that could seat 8 people, though it was covered with a thick layer of dust. It was when they climbed the stairs to the second floor that Mercy's unease grew stronger. The steps creaked with each footfall, and the air seemed to grow colder as they climbed higher. "This can be our bedroom," Thomas said, opening the door to a room at the front of the house. It was spacious, with 2 tall windows and faded floral wallpaper. And this room here would be perfect for the nursery. He opened the door to a smaller room next to theirs, and Mercy stepped inside. Immediately she felt dizzy. The sadness that had been hovering around her since they arrived suddenly intensified, becoming almost unbearable. The room was painted a pale yellow, with white trim around the windows and door. In one corner sat an old rocking chair, its wooden surface worn smooth by years of use. Someone had painted small flowers along the chair's arms, delicate roses and daisies in soft colors. "My grandmother must have used this as a nursery too," Thomas said, running his hand along the windowsill. "Look, she even left the rocking chair." But Mercy was not listening. She was staring at the chair, watching it rock very gently back and forth, as if someone had just gotten up from it. There was no breeze in the room, no reason for the chair to move. "Thomas," she whispered. But when she turned, he was examining the closet and had not seen the chair's movement. The rocking had stopped. Mercy pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby kick as if responding to her fear. She took a deep breath, telling herself she was being silly. Old houses settled in strange ways. The chair had probably been rocking when they entered the room, and she had just not noticed until now. But deep down she knew that was not true. As they finished exploring the house and began unloading their belongings from the truck, Mercy tried to focus on the positive aspects of their new home. The house was theirs, free and clear. They would have space to raise their child. Thomas was happy, and that mattered to her. But as the sun began to set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard, Mercy could not shake the feeling that they were not alone in the old farmhouse. Something was watching them, something that had been waiting a very long time for them to arrive. And as she stood in the doorway, one hand on her pregnant belly and the other gripping the doorframe, Mercy Harrow had no idea that her life was about to become a nightmare that would change her forever. The old house seemed to sigh around them as darkness fell. And somewhere in the distance, Mercy could swear she heard the faint sound of a baby crying. 3 weeks had passed since Mercy and Thomas moved into the old Harrow farmhouse. The October air was crisp, and the leaves on the surrounding trees had turned brilliant shades of red and gold. During the day, with sunlight streaming through the windows, the house almost felt normal. Mercy had worked hard to make their new home comfortable. She scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, washed all the windows, and hung her mother's cheerful quilts on the walls. Thomas had fixed the loose boards on the front porch and painted the kitchen a sunny yellow color that reminded Mercy of spring daffodils. The baby was growing strong inside her, kicking more often now. At 7 months pregnant, Mercy felt large and awkward, but also excited. She spent hours in the nursery, folding tiny clothes her mother had sewn, and arranging the few baby items they had managed to buy. The rocking chair still sat in the corner where they had found it. Mercy had cleaned it thoroughly, polishing the wood until it shone. Sometimes she would sit in it and rock gently, imagining herself holding her baby in just a few months. During those first 3 weeks, Mercy almost convinced herself that her fears had been foolish. The house was just old, full of creaks and settling noises that any old building would make. The sadness she had felt on their first day must have been her own emotions, mixed up with pregnancy hormones and the stress of moving. Thomas left for work at the lumber mill every morning at 6, driving the 20 miles into town in their old truck. He would not return until after 6 in the evening, leaving Mercy alone in the big house for 12 hours each day. At first, she enjoyed the solitude. She could work at her own pace, rest when the baby made her tired, and take long walks around the property. The 40 acres of woodland were beautiful, filled with deer trails and small clearings where wildflowers still bloomed. But as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, Mercy began to feel uneasy again. It started with small things she could easily explain away. A door that she was sure she had closed would be standing open. A window that had been shut tight would be cracked an inch, letting in the cool autumn air. Books would be moved from where she had left them, stacked in different arrangements on the shelf. Mercy told herself she was becoming forgetful, that pregnancy was making her absent-minded. She had heard other women talk about pregnancy brain, how expecting mothers sometimes could not remember simple things. But then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, exactly 4 weeks after they had moved in. Thomas had fallen asleep early after a long day at the mill. Mercy lay beside him, listening to his steady breathing and feeling the baby move restlessly in her belly. The house was quiet, except for the usual settling sounds. The old furnace in the basement would kick on periodically, sending warm air through the vents with a soft whooshing noise. The wind outside made the trees creak and sway. Mercy was just drifting off to sleep when she heard it. A baby crying. Her eyes snapped open, and she lay perfectly still, straining to listen. The crying was faint but unmistakable. High-pitched wails that seemed to be coming from somewhere inside the house. Mercy's heart began to race. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling her own baby kick in response to her sudden fear. The crying continued, seeming to come from the direction of the nursery. She shook Thomas gently. "Thomas, wake up. Do you hear that?" Thomas mumbled something and rolled over, still fast asleep. "Thomas," she whispered more urgently, "there's a baby crying." But even as she spoke, the crying stopped. The house fell silent again, leaving only the sound of Thomas's breathing and her own rapid heartbeat. Mercy lay awake for the rest of the night, but the crying did not return. The next morning, she told Thomas what she had heard. He listened with a concerned expression, then suggested that maybe she had heard an animal outside. "Cats could sound remarkably like crying babies," he said, or perhaps it had been the wind through the trees. Mercy wanted to believe him, but she knew what she had heard. It was not a cat or the wind. It was a baby, crying somewhere inside their house. That night, she waited and listened. At exactly 17 minutes after 2 in the morning, the crying began again. This time, Mercy got out of bed immediately. She grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand and crept out of the bedroom, following the sound down the hallway toward the nursery. The crying grew louder as she approached the room. It was definitely coming from inside the nursery. But when she pushed open the door and shined her flashlight around the room, she saw nothing unusual. The rocking chair sat empty in its corner. The crib they had set up stood ready for their baby, with a soft yellow blanket folded neatly inside. Everything was exactly as she had left it. But the crying continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As Mercy stood in the doorway, something strange happened to her body. Her breasts began to ache, and she felt the familiar sensation of her milk letting down. Warm wetness spread across the front of her nightgown as her body responded to the crying baby it could hear but not see. This physical response terrified Mercy more than anything else. Her body was reacting to the crying as if there really was a baby in the room who needed her. But there was no baby there. There could not be. The crying lasted for about 5 minutes, then faded away gradually, like someone walking away while carrying a crying infant. Mercy stood in the doorway for a long time after the sound stopped, her flashlight beam dancing around the empty room. Finally, she returned to bed, changed her wet nightgown, and lay awake until dawn. She did not tell Thomas about this second incident. She was starting to worry that he might think she was losing her mind, and maybe he would be right. But the crying came again the next night, and the next. Always at 2:17 in the morning, always from the nursery, always lasting about 5 minutes before fading away. And every time, Mercy's body responded as if there was a real baby crying for her attention. During the day, she began to dread nightfall. She would find excuses to stay in the kitchen or living room, avoiding the upstairs hallway where the nursery was located. When she had to go upstairs, she would hurry past the nursery door without looking inside. The lack of sleep was taking its toll. She felt exhausted and emotional, crying over small things that would not normally bother her. Her appetite disappeared, and the baby seemed to sense her distress, moving more frequently and forcefully than before. Thomas noticed the changes in his wife. "You look tired, Mercy," he said one morning over breakfast. "Are you sleeping well?" Mercy considered telling him the truth, but she was afraid. What if he did not believe her? What if he thought the stress of pregnancy was making her imagine things? In 1952, women who reported seeing or hearing things that were not there were sometimes sent to asylums for their own good. "The baby keeps me awake," she said instead, which was partly true. "It kicks a lot at night." Thomas nodded sympathetically and suggested she try drinking warm milk before bed. But warm milk could not help with what Mercy was experiencing. On the 5th night of the crying, she discovered something new and even more disturbing. As she stood in the nursery doorway listening to the invisible baby's wails, she noticed the rocking chair. It was moving, very gently, almost imperceptibly. The chair rocked back and forth. Just a tiny motion, as if someone was sitting in it and rocking very softly to comfort a crying baby. Mercy watched in fascination and horror as the chair continued its gentle movement throughout the entire 5 minutes of crying. When the crying stopped, the chair gradually came to rest. This could not be explained away by settling floors or drafts. The chair was responding to the crying baby that only Mercy could hear. That night, she made a decision. She would start keeping a journal of everything that happened. She would write down times, descriptions, and details. If she was going crazy, at least she would have a record of it. And if she was not crazy, if something supernatural was really happening in their house, she would have evidence. The next day, while Thomas was at work, Mercy drove into town and bought a small notebook from the general store. That evening, she began her record. October 30th, 1952. Baby crying started at 2:17 a.m., lasted 5 minutes. Rocking chair moved during crying. My milk let down as usual. She did not know it yet. But this journal would become the most important thing she owned. Because the crying baby was just the beginning. Much worse things were waiting in the shadows of the old Harrow farmhouse. And Mercy was about to discover that some houses remember every tragedy that ever happened within their walls. November brought the first snow to the Vermont mountains, and with it came changes that made Mercy's world much darker and more frightening. She was now 8 months pregnant, her belly so large she could barely see her feet. The baby seemed restless inside her, moving constantly as if trying to escape. The nightly crying had become routine, but it was no longer the only strange thing happening in the old Harrow house. New and more disturbing events began to occur, making Mercy question everything she thought she knew about reality. It started with the voice. The first time Mercy heard it, she was folding laundry in the kitchen on a gray Tuesday morning. Thomas had left for work an hour earlier, and the house was quiet except for the wind rattling the windows. "Mercy." The voice was soft, barely a whisper, but it was definitely someone calling her name. It sounded like a woman, elderly and sad. Mercy looked up from the basket of clothes, her heart beginning to race. "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. She walked through the downstairs rooms, checking to make sure all the doors were locked. Everything was secure. No one could have gotten inside without her hearing them. But as she returned to the kitchen, she heard it again. "Mercy. Mercy." This time the voice seemed to come from upstairs, somewhere near the nursery. Mercy stood at the bottom of the staircase, gripping the banister with white knuckles. She wanted to call out again, but something told her that would be a mistake. Instead, she grabbed her journal and wrote down exactly what had happened, including the time and what the voice sounded like. Over the next few days, the voice became more frequent. It would call her name when she was cooking, when she was cleaning, when she was trying to rest. Always when she was alone. Always from empty rooms. Sometimes the voice sounded pleading, as if whoever was calling needed help. Other times it sounded angry, almost accusatory. But it was always the same elderly woman's voice, and it always knew her name. Mercy began to dread being alone in the house, but she had no choice. Thomas needed to work to support their growing family, and they could not afford for him to stay home with her. Then came the morning when Mercy discovered something that made her blood run cold. She was preparing the nursery for the baby's arrival, arranging tiny clothes in the dresser drawers when she noticed something different about the crib. Inside the crib, folded neatly on the mattress, was a small white dress. Mercy stared at it in confusion. She had never seen this dress before. It was made of delicate white cotton with tiny pearl buttons and lace trim around the collar and sleeves. It looked handmade, the kind of special dress a baby might wear for a christening or other important occasion. But where had it come from? Mercy was certain she had not put it there. She remembered checking the crib the night before, and it had been empty except for the yellow blanket she had placed inside. With trembling hands, she picked up the dress. It was old, she could tell, but well preserved. The fabric felt soft and expensive. Someone had spent hours making this dress with great care and love. She searched through all her baby clothes, thinking perhaps she had forgotten about this dress among the items her mother had given her. But she found nothing similar. This dress did not belong to her. As she held it, Mercy felt overwhelmed by sadness. Not her own sadness, but something that seemed to come from the dress itself. Whoever had made this dress had put so much hope and love into every stitch. But something terrible had happened to prevent the baby from ever wearing it. That night, Mercy told Thomas about finding the dress. She showed it to him, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Thomas examined the dress with a puzzled expression. "It's beautiful," he said. "Maybe my grandmother left it in the crib for us. She probably made it for one of her babies years ago." This explanation made sense, but it did not explain why Mercy had not noticed the dress before. She was sure the crib had been empty when she checked it the previous evening. But Thomas's logical explanation helped calm her fears a little. Maybe she had simply overlooked the dress before. Maybe her pregnancy was making her more forgetful than she realized. However, the next morning brought something that could not be explained away so easily. Mercy woke up and went to the nursery to check on everything, as had become her habit. Inside the crib, next to the white dress, were two more baby outfits. A tiny blue sailor suit with matching hat. A pink dress with small embroidered roses. 3 complete baby outfits now lay in the crib, all perfectly clean and neatly folded. Mercy's hands shook as she picked up each item. Like the white dress, these clothes were old, but well preserved. They had been made with love and care, every detail perfect. But where were they coming from? She ran downstairs to find Thomas, but he had already left for work. Mercy was alone in the house with 3 mysterious baby outfits that had appeared overnight. This time she decided to investigate. If these clothes had belonged to Thomas's grandmother, perhaps there were more stored somewhere in the house. Maybe the old woman had left a trunk or chest full of baby items. Mercy spent the entire day searching the house from top to bottom. She looked in closets, under beds, in the basement, and in the attic. She found old furniture, boxes of books, and various household items that had belonged to Eleanor Harrow, but she found no baby clothes anywhere, no trunk or chest that might have contained the outfits appearing in the nursery. As she searched, Mercy discovered something else that disturbed her. In a dusty box in the attic, she found old photographs of the Harrow family. Most showed Thomas's grandparents when they were young, along with various relatives. But 3 of the photographs showed something that made Mercy's stomach clench with fear. They were pictures of babies. 3 different babies, all dressed in the exact same outfits that had appeared in her nursery. The first photograph showed a baby girl wearing the white dress with pearl buttons. The second showed a baby boy in the blue sailor suit. The third showed another baby girl in the pink dress with embroidered roses. On the back of each photograph, written in faded ink, were names and dates. Margaret Harrow, born April 15, 1895, died April 20, 1895. James Harrow, born September 3, 1897, died September 8, 1897. Catherine Harrow, born December 12, 1899, died December 18, 1899. 3 babies. All had died within days of being born. All in this house. Mercy sat in the dusty attic, holding the photographs with trembling hands. Eleanor Harrow had lost 3 babies in this house, 3 babies who had lived only a few days each before dying. And now their clothes were appearing in the nursery where Mercy planned to bring her own baby. The implications terrified her. Was someone trying to tell her something? Was this a warning about the house? About the room she had chosen for her nursery? Or was something else happening, something supernatural that she did not want to think about? That evening, when Thomas came home from work, Mercy showed him the photographs. She watched his face go pale as he read the names and dates on the back. "I never knew," he said quietly. Grandmother never talked about having babies who died. She always seemed so sad when children were mentioned, but I thought it was just because she never had a family of her own. "Thomas," Mercy said, her voice barely a whisper, "these clothes are appearing in our nursery. The same clothes these babies wore. What if something is trying to warn us? What if this room is not safe for our baby?" Thomas was quiet for a long time, studying the photographs. Finally, he looked up at his wife with worried eyes. "Maybe we should set up the nursery in a different room," he said, "just to be safe." But even as he spoke, both of them wondered if changing rooms would be enough. Because if the spirits of 3 dead babies were somehow connected to this house, would any room truly be safe? That night, as Mercy lay in bed listening for the now familiar sound of crying at 2:17 a.m., she felt her own baby kick strongly inside her belly. She placed her hands on her stomach and whispered a prayer for protection. But deep down, she feared that whatever had taken Eleanor Harrow's 3 babies might be waiting for hers as well. December arrived with a vengeance, bringing heavy snowstorms that trapped Mercy inside the old farmhouse for days at a time. She was now 9 months pregnant, so large and uncomfortable that even simple tasks like climbing the stairs left her breathless. The baby was due any day, and Dr. Patterson from town had warned that the winter roads might prevent him from reaching the house when her time came. But Mercy had bigger worries than a difficult birth. The supernatural activity in the house had grown so intense that she could no longer pretend it was her imagination. After discovering the photographs of Eleanor's 3 dead babies, Thomas had moved the nursery to a room on the opposite side of the house. They had hoped this would solve the problem, but it only seemed to make whatever was haunting them angry. The voice that called Mercy's name had become louder and more frequent. Now it followed her throughout the house, coming from rooms she had just left or was about to enter. Sometimes it sounded pleading, begging her to listen. Other times it sounded furious, as if she was ignoring something very important. But the most terrifying incident happened on a Tuesday morning when Thomas had left early for work, due to a special order at the lumber mill. Mercy was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate steps that could only belong to an adult. She assumed Thomas had forgotten something and come back home. "Thomas?" she called out. "Is that you?" The footsteps stopped. Mercy waited, but there was no answer. After a few minutes, she walked to the bottom of the staircase and looked up. The hallway above was empty. "Thomas," she called again. Then she heard something that made her blood freeze in her veins. A woman's voice, clear and strong, coming from the direction of the new nursery. "That room belongs to my babies. Move your things back where they belong." Mercy gripped the banister so hard her knuckles turned white. The voice was not the whispered calling of her name that she had grown used to. This was a direct command, spoken by someone who expected to be obeyed. With her heart pounding, Mercy climbed the stairs as quickly as her pregnant body would allow. She had to know who was in her house. The new nursery door was closed. Mercy was certain she had left it open that morning when she checked on the baby furniture. She pressed her ear against the door and heard movement inside. Someone was definitely in there. Taking a deep breath, Mercy turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. The room was empty, but it had been completely destroyed. The crib had been turned over, its mattress thrown across the room. Baby clothes were scattered everywhere, torn and twisted as if someone had been in a rage. The rocking chair from the original nursery now sat in the center of the room, rocking violently back and forth with no one in it. And on the wall, written in what looked like mud or dirt, were the words, "My babies come home." Mercy backed out of the room and slammed the door shut. She ran downstairs as fast as she could manage and grabbed her journal, writing down everything she had seen and heard. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the pen. When Thomas came home that evening, Mercy showed him the destroyed nursery. His face went pale as he surveyed the damage. "Maybe we should leave," Mercy whispered. "Maybe we should go stay with my parents until after the baby is born." But when they tried to pack a bag and load it into the truck, something strange happened. Every time they carried a suitcase toward the front door, they would suddenly feel dizzy and confused. They would find themselves walking back upstairs unpacking their clothes as if they had changed their minds about leaving. After 3 attempts, they realized the horrible truth. They could not leave. Something was keeping them in the house. That night, Mercy had the most terrifying experience yet. She was lying in bed, unable to sleep because of the baby's constant movement. When the room suddenly became very cold, her breath began to fog in the air and frost started forming on the windows despite the heat from the furnace. At the foot of the bed, a figure began to materialize. It was an elderly woman in a long white nightgown, her gray hair hanging loose around her shoulders. Her face was gaunt and pale, with deep dark circles under her eyes. But it was her expression that terrified Mercy most. The woman looked desperate, hungry, and completely insane. "Eleanor," Mercy whispered, somehow knowing this was Thomas's grandmother. The ghostly figure nodded slowly. When she spoke, her voice filled the entire room, coming from everywhere at once. "You have something that belongs to me," Eleanor said. "That baby you carry is one of mine. Come back to me. I have been waiting so long for my children to return." Mercy tried to wake Thomas, but he seemed to be in an unnaturally deep sleep. She could not rouse him no matter how hard she shook him. "That's not true," Mercy said, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is my baby, my child." Eleanor's ghostly form drifted closer to the bed. "I lost 3 babies in this house, 3 precious souls who were taken from me too soon. But death cannot keep a mother from her children forever. Your baby carries their spirit. When it is born, my babies will finally be complete." The ghost reached out toward Mercy's belly with skeletal fingers. Where she touched, Mercy felt a burning cold that made her gasp in pain. "I will take good care of all of you," Eleanor continued. "You can stay here with me forever. We will be a family again, just like it should have been." Mercy realized with horror what Eleanor intended. The ghost did not just want her baby. She wanted all of them to die so they could stay in the house with her forever. "No," Mercy said firmly, placing her hands protectively over her belly. "I won't let you hurt my baby." Eleanor's expression changed from desperate pleading to cold fury. "You cannot stop me. This is my house. These are my babies. I have been waiting for 70 years, and I will not wait any longer." The ghost began to fade away, but her final words hung in the freezing air like a threat. "When your time comes to give birth, I will be there, and this time my babies will live forever." After Eleanor disappeared, the room slowly returned to normal temperature. Thomas woke up with no memory of what had happened, confused about why Mercy was crying and shaking. Mercy did not tell him about seeing Eleanor. She was afraid that if she described the ghost's intentions, Thomas might panic and do something dangerous. Instead, she held her secret close and began to plan. If Eleanor wanted her baby, Mercy would have to fight for it. And if that meant battling a ghost for the life of her child, then that was exactly what she would do. But first, she needed to understand what she was really fighting against. The next day, while Thomas was at work, Mercy decided to learn everything she could about Eleanor Harrow and the babies who had died in this house. What she discovered would prepare her for the most important battle of her life. A battle between a living mother and a dead one, with an innocent baby's soul hanging in the balance. The ghost had waited 70 years for this moment. But Mercy had been preparing for motherhood her entire life, and she would not give up her child without a fight that would shake the very foundations of the old farmhouse. January 15th, 1953 began like any other winter day, but it would become the most terrifying and important day of Mercy Harrow's life. She woke before dawn with a sharp pain in her back that made her gasp. As she lay in bed trying to breathe through the discomfort, She felt a warm gush of water between her legs. Her baby was coming. Thomas had left early that morning to help repair storm damage at the lumber mill. A massive blizzard had hit Vermont the night before, dumping 3 feet of snow and making the roads completely impassable. Even if Mercy could reach the telephone, Dr. Patterson would never be able to get to the farmhouse in time. She was going to have to deliver this baby alone, in a house haunted by a ghost who wanted to claim her child. The contractions started slowly, just uncomfortable tightening in her belly that came every 20 minutes or so. Mercy used the time between pains to gather supplies. She found clean towels, boiled water on the stove, and set up everything she could think of in the master bedroom. But as the morning progressed and the contractions grew stronger, Mercy realized she was not alone in the house. The supernatural activity that had been building for months exploded into a terrifying symphony of paranormal chaos. Every door in the house began slamming shut and flying open repeatedly. The lights flickered on and off in rhythm with her contractions. Windows rattled as if hurricane winds were battering them, even though the air outside was perfectly still. And through it all, Mercy could hear Eleanor's voice calling out commands and threats. "Give me my baby. Let my children come home. You cannot fight me forever." By noon, Mercy's contractions were coming every 5 minutes, each one stronger than the last. She was alone, frightened, and in terrible pain. But worse than the physical agony was the growing presence of Eleanor's ghost, which seemed to be gathering strength as the birth approached. The temperature in the bedroom began dropping rapidly. Mercy could see her breath fogging in the air, and ice crystals started forming on the windows. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably between contractions, but she knew the cold was not natural. Eleanor was preparing for something. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when Mercy's contractions were so intense she could barely think straight, she heard the sound of a truck struggling through the snow outside. Relief flooded through her as she recognized the engine noise. Thomas was home. He burst through the front door, covered in snow and panic. "Mercy, I came as soon as I could. The foreman let us go early when he realized the storm was getting worse." "The baby's coming," Mercy gasped through another contraction. "I think it will be soon." Thomas had helped deliver calves on his uncle's farm, but delivering a human baby was completely different. Still, he tried to stay calm and help his wife as best he could. But the supernatural forces in the house had other plans. As Mercy's labor intensified, so did Eleanor's attacks. The ghost began appearing visibly throughout the room, her skeletal form drifting around the bed like a vulture waiting for its prey. She reached toward Mercy with grasping fingers, trying to touch the baby that was struggling to be born. "Thomas, do you see her?" Mercy cried out during a particularly strong contraction. Thomas looked around the room with wide, frightened eyes. At first he saw nothing, but gradually Eleanor's form became visible to him as well. The ghost was no longer hiding her presence. "Dear God," Thomas whispered. "Grandmother, what are you doing?" Eleanor turned toward him with a face full of madness and desperate hunger. "Thomas, my dear boy, you brought me exactly what I needed, a vessel for my babies to return. Soon we will all be together forever." The ghost raised her hands, and suddenly every piece of furniture in the room began flying through the air. The mirror above the dresser shattered, sending glass flying everywhere. Books launched themselves from shelves like missiles. The rocking chair from the original nursery materialized in the corner and began rocking so violently it lifted off the floor. Through all of this chaos, Mercy continued laboring to bring her baby into the world. She could feel the child moving down, ready to be born, but she was terrified of what would happen when the baby finally arrived. At 6 o'clock in the evening, just as the winter sun was setting behind the trees, Mercy felt the overwhelming urge to push. Her baby was ready to be born. "I can see the head," Thomas shouted over the supernatural chaos surrounding them. "Keep pushing, Mercy. Our baby is almost here." But as the baby's head emerged, Eleanor's ghost let out a shriek of triumph that shattered every remaining window in the house. The temperature dropped so low that icicles began forming on the ceiling. The ghost rushed toward the bed with her arms outstretched, ready to claim the newborn child. "No!" Mercy screamed, finding strength she did not know she possessed. This is my baby. You cannot have her." With one final, enormous push, Mercy's daughter slipped into the world. Thomas caught the tiny girl in his trembling hands, and the baby immediately began crying with strong, healthy lungs. Eleanor's ghost stopped suddenly, hovering over the bed with confusion on her ancient face. "My baby," she whispered. "Let me hold my baby." But something amazing happened in that moment. As Mercy held her newborn daughter for the first time, a fierce, protective love filled her entire being. This love was so powerful, so pure and strong, that it seemed to glow around her like a shield of light. Eleanor tried to reach for the baby, but her ghostly hands could not penetrate the barrier of maternal love that surrounded Mercy and her child. "That baby belongs to me," Eleanor shrieked, her voice full of rage and desperation. "No," Mercy said firmly, looking directly at the ghost. "This baby belongs with the living. Your children are gone, Eleanor. You need to let them rest in peace." For the first time since her haunting began, Eleanor seemed to really see Mercy. The madness in her ghostly eyes flickered, replaced briefly by confusion and pain. "My babies," Eleanor whispered. "I lost my babies. They died so young. I just wanted them to come home." Mercy felt a wave of sympathy for the tortured spirit, but she did not let down her guard. "I know you loved them. I know losing them broke your heart. But keeping their spirits trapped here won't bring them back. You need to let them go." Eleanor looked at the newborn baby in Mercy's arms, and suddenly her expression changed completely. The hunger and madness faded away, replaced by the face of a heartbroken mother who finally understood what she had become. "This is not my child," Eleanor said quietly. "This baby belongs to you." The ghost began to fade away, but before she disappeared completely, she looked at Mercy one last time. "Take good care of her," Eleanor whispered. "Love her every day. Don't make the same mistakes I did." With those words, Eleanor Harrow's spirit finally found peace. The supernatural chaos in the room stopped instantly. The temperature returned to normal. The flying furniture settled gently to the floor. The old farmhouse fell silent except for the soft crying of a healthy newborn baby and the relieved sobbing of her parents. Mercy looked down at her daughter, perfect and beautiful, with tiny fingers that gripped her mother's thumb with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," Mercy whispered. "Welcome to the world. You're safe now." Outside, the blizzard was ending, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the clear winter sky. The haunting was over, but Mercy knew that this experience had changed her forever, and she would spend the rest of her life protecting her daughter from any force that might threaten her happiness. 3 days after her daughter's birth, Mercy Harrow sat in the kitchen of the old farmhouse, nursing her baby and watching the sunrise through windows that no longer rattled with supernatural fury. The house felt different now, peaceful in a way it had never been during the months she had lived there. Little Catherine, as they had named their daughter, was a perfect baby. She slept well, ate eagerly, and seemed completely unaware that she had been born in the middle of a supernatural battle for her very soul. When Mercy looked into her daughter's bright blue eyes, she saw only innocence and the promise of a normal, happy life. But Mercy knew they could not stay in this house. Even though Eleanor's spirit had found peace and the haunting had ended, too much had happened within these walls. Every room held memories of terror and supernatural encounters that would haunt Mercy for the rest of her life. She wanted to raise her daughter somewhere safe, somewhere free from the shadows of the past. Thomas agreed completely. The experience had shaken him to his core, forcing him to accept that there were things in the world he could not understand or control. He had seen furniture fly through the air and watched his dead grandmother try to steal his newborn child. Those images would never leave his mind. On Catherine's 4th day of life, the small family packed their belongings and left the farmhouse forever. They moved into a small apartment above the bakery in town, cramped but cheerful, with neighbors nearby and no history of tragedy. Thomas sold the farmhouse and its 40 acres to a developer from Boston, who planned to tear down the old building and construct modern vacation homes. The sale gave them enough money to buy a modest house on the edge of town, with a white picket fence and a garden where Catherine could play safely as she grew up. The old farmhouse was demolished in the spring of 1953. Workers reported no unusual incidents during the destruction, and the land was eventually divided into small lots for summer cottages. None of the new buildings experienced any supernatural activity, as if Eleanor's spirit had taken all the restless energy with her when she finally found peace. But the experience left lasting changes on everyone involved. Mercy discovered that her encounter with the supernatural had awakened abilities she never knew she possessed. She could sense when something was wrong in a house, could feel the emotions of people who had lived and died in certain places. It was not a gift she had asked for, but she learned to use it to help others. Word spread quietly through the small community about what had happened at the Harrow farmhouse. Other families began coming to Mercy when they experienced unexplained events in their homes. She helped them understand what they were dealing with and how to find peace with spirits who could not rest. Mercy never charged money for this help. She simply shared her knowledge and offered comfort to people who were frightened and confused by supernatural encounters. Over the years, she became known as someone who could be trusted with impossible stories and who would never judge or dismiss anyone's experiences. Thomas changed careers after their ordeal. He left the lumber mill and became a counselor, working with families who were struggling with difficult situations. The supernatural battle for his daughter had taught him about the power of love and protection, and he wanted to help other parents keep their children safe. He also became deeply religious, attending church every Sunday and saying prayers of gratitude for his family's survival. He never spoke publicly about what had happened in the farmhouse, but he encouraged other men to take their wives' fears and concerns seriously, no matter how strange they might seem. The marriage between Mercy and Thomas grew stronger after their shared trauma. They had faced something terrible together and survived through their love for each other and their child. They went on to have 3 more children, all born safely in the town hospital with no supernatural interference. Catherine Harrow grew up to be a bright, curious child with no memory of her dramatic birth. Mercy and Thomas decided to wait until she was 18 to tell her the full story of what had happened the night she was born. They wanted her to have a normal childhood, free from the knowledge that she had once been claimed by a ghost. When Catherine finally learned the truth on her 18th birthday, she was fascinated rather than frightened. She had always been interested in history and mysteries, and learning about her family's supernatural encounter inspired her to study paranormal phenomena professionally. Catherine became one of the first female paranormal researchers in the country, specializing in cases involving families and children. She traveled across America, documenting supernatural encounters and helping people understand that they were not alone in their experiences. Her research into family-based hauntings became groundbreaking work in the field. She published several books about protective maternal instincts and how love could serve as a barrier against supernatural threats. Her most famous case study was her own birth, which she wrote about with her mother's permission when Mercy was in her 70s. Father McKenna, the priest who had been called to help during Catherine's birth but arrived too late, became a close family friend. He documented the Harrow case for the Catholic Church's records of supernatural events. His report helped establish guidelines for dealing with family hauntings and protecting children from supernatural threats. The priest often said that the Harrow case taught him that sometimes the most powerful protection against evil was not holy water or religious rituals, but the pure love of a mother for her child. As the years passed, Mercy aged gracefully but never forgot the lessons she had learned during those terrifying months in the farmhouse. She taught her children to trust their instincts, to speak up when something felt wrong, and to never be afraid of asking for help when they needed it. She also taught them that love was the strongest force in the universe, more powerful than fear or death or any supernatural threat. This lesson served them well throughout their lives. When Mercy reached her 70s, she finally agreed to share her story with paranormal researchers and writers. She wanted people to know that supernatural encounters were real, but also that they could be survived with courage, love, and determination. She emphasized that Eleanor had not been evil, just a mother driven mad by grief who had lost her way between life and death. Understanding this had helped Mercy forgive the ghost and find peace with her own experiences. In her interviews, Mercy always stressed that the most important part of her story was not the supernatural elements, but the power of maternal love to protect and overcome any threat to a child's safety. Today, Mercy Harrow is 89 years old and still lives in the same house in Millbrook where she raised her 4 children. The white picket fence still surrounds her garden, though it needs fresh paint, and neighborhood children still come to hear her stories about the old days. Catherine continues her paranormal research and visits her mother every month. She has never married or had children of her own, dedicating her life to helping families deal with supernatural encounters. The empty lots where the old farmhouse once stood remain undeveloped. Several attempts have been made to build houses there, but each construction project has failed for practical reasons like unstable soil or permit problems. Local people joke that the land does not want to be disturbed, but no one has reported any supernatural activity. Mercy's journal from those terrifying months still exists, carefully preserved by Catherine for historical research. The detailed records of supernatural encounters provide valuable insight into how hauntings develop and how they can be resolved through understanding and compassion. But perhaps the most important legacy of Mercy Harrow's story is the lesson it teaches about the strength that can be found in the most difficult circumstances. A frightened 18-year-old girl, alone and pregnant in a haunted house, found the courage to fight for her child's life against impossible odds. Her story reminds us that love really can conquer fear, that mothers will do anything to protect their children, and that sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most extraordinary acts of bravery. And on quiet winter nights in Millbrook, when the snow falls softly and the old houses creak in the wind, people still tell the story of young Mercy Harrow and the ghost who tried to steal her baby. It is a story that proves that some bonds are stronger than death itself, and that a mother's love is the most powerful force in this world or any other.